I'm Kathy Stack, and right now I'm an independent consultant, but I spent over 30 years in the federal government, most of that time at the Office of Management and Budget. At OMB, I rose up to be the Deputy Associate Director for Education, Income Maintenance, and Labor, which basically was most of the non-health social services programs. And then my last few years at OMB, I set up something called the Evidence Team, which I'm happy to say we set it up in 2013. It still exists today, and it's helping federal agencies build capacity to do evaluation and use data. I spent a few years from 2015 through 2018 at the Arnold Foundation and had the opportunity to build a portfolio focused on building evaluation and data capacity at the federal, state, and local level, and saw a lot of really great innovations going on at the state and local level that have informed my thinking. Wish I'd known about them when I was at the federal level, and now I'm doing independent consulting.
How can we improve outcomes in grants management?
One of the things that I've seen over the last several decades by multiple administrations is an attempt to lift up why are we spending so much time on compliance and how do we shift more effort to outcomes. And there have been some pockets of success, usually where there's been an investment in building data capacity to reliably report information that's useful, not just to the federal government, but primarily to the grantees in the local level. We saw that particularly in education and in health. I personally think that you need both a top-down and a bottoms-up strategy to get real meaningful reforms in grants management to make them more outcomes focused. So at the federal level, we have a lot of programs trying to do similar things, and their requirements aren't aligned. And it would be very constructive to have more coordination across related programs, developing common metrics and ways of making it easier for grantees to focus on what really matters. At the same time, we need a bottoms-up option. We need innovative grantees, and there's many communities out there that are starting to do this already, who have a better way to demonstrate outcomes because they're using data from multiple reliable sources to coordinate services, to test different strategies. And all of that data is used not just for them, but they can then generate the information that the federal government needs to say, hey, this grantee is using dollars as intended.
How can you ensure accountability for federal funds while providing flexibility and innovation for grants recipients?
So I think there's a great opportunity to align the interests of federal government and federal taxpayers with the needs of local communities. I think we recognize where trust in government is greatest. It's at the local level. It's where people are delivering real services that are quite tangible. And we have a lot of communities that are now thinking about all the different funding streams that are coming from the federal government into their communities, and they know that they could be using them more effectively if they could coordinate them, braid them, and had the flexibility to identify the populations most in need, and then build targeted services that they can be evaluating as they go to see if they can get better outcomes. And we actually have an example of that. The performance partnership pilots for disconnected youth was something that I worked on. It's now in law, set in law in 2014 in appropriations law, and it allows youth serving programs across labor, health and human services, Department of Education, Department of Justice, and housing and urban development. A locality or a state can seek pilot authority to be able to blend funding, choose a high-need population, and develop a real out-of-the-box coordinated strategy. But in order to get that flexibility to do that, they have to cement some very meaningful indicators. And rather than the federal government specifying specific metrics, there's some flexibility. They have to choose in employment, outcome that looks at earnings and whether youth get jobs. They have to choose an educational outcome measure, which could be test scores, graduation, enrollment in college, or training. And then they can choose a well-being measure of their own making that is some other aspect of what is really meaningful in that community. And I think there's a real opportunity here for allowing some flexibility, not saying that at the federal level we have to have complete uniform data collection from every grantee, but instead saying, hey, if you're a high-performing, committed grantee, we're going to give you some flexibility to tailor the metrics to what means most for your community and the people you're trying to serve.
If grantees propose some of their own outcome measures, how do you deal with data validity across diverse data?
I think there's now a huge opportunity, given technology advances and interoperability across systems, to come up with much more robust measures and much more reliable reporting than we've had in the past. Traditionally, we've put the onus on every grantee, every program at the federal level to identify a set of measures, and every grantee to figure out how to do that within their own silo. And often, the grantees are working in such a narrow silo that it's self-reported data. They're pushing data up to the federal government level that they candidly might tell you, we don't really trust the data, but it's the best we can do. There's a different way of doing business now. The outcomes we often most care about are outcomes that can be measured through authoritative data sets. The wages that are in the unemployment insurance data systems for everybody who is employed. The educational test scores and graduation rates that are in student longitudinal data sets that every state maintains. Healthcare utilization. Those are now in health records that can be accessed and linked to other records. And think of it as, and we actually have this capacity in some leading jurisdictions. Washington State is an example, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania is another, where they're able to link data sets across a set of programs and understand what's happening with this set of youth or this set of adults in terms of their employment outcomes, their housing stability, whether or not they're using public benefits, how much they're using the ER, and how much they're take advantage of government services that state or local governments may be providing. It's a different way of doing business.
If some result data came from third-party sources, this would reduce the burden on grantees, right?
Now, I don't think you want to bypass the grantee entirely, but I think enabling the grantee to say, we have a third-party source that can provide that information, they have authorization to send it, or alternatively, the grantee is drawing information out of that authoritative source and forwarding it up, but it's very auditable and possible to validate so that everybody has trust in the results.
How can we provide value back to the recipient for the data they provide to the grantors?
I think it's a great opportunity to have a real important conversation that hasn't happened enough across levels of government. There ought to be a purposeful process that the federal government initiates to seek input from grantees about what's the data that you're producing and sending to us. Is it useful to you? Do you think it's reliable? It could be a little anonymous on the reliability side. And at the federal end, we should be asking, are we using this data? If it's not useful to the feds, why are we collecting it? If it's not reliable, then we need a better solution. We either need to say, let's not collect it, or let's see whether or not there's a way of improving the quality or pulling data from another data source in order to get the data that we all trust. I think there is a reality in terms of federal appropriations for federal staff. I mean, we may have this beautiful idea that there could be lots of analytical staff at the federal level taking all this data in and analyzing it. The reality is Congress is not looking to staff up federal agencies. And got to get creative about how do we get analytics in the hands of the people who can actually make decisions on on which they can improve.
If funds are blended across programs, how can we attribute credit to the grant programs that provide these funds?
There's a paradigm that's existed at the federal government for a very long time that is very program-centric. Each program has a statute, a set of requirements, and an expectation that it perform and that it will be judged against other programs. And we've set up a system where programs are competing to demonstrate that they're doing better than others that are working on similar problems. And we forget that the processes we set up for accountability for each separate program actually get in the way of using the dollars more effectively when they get down to the communities that they're reaching. What we really want is we want players in communities who are pulling down these separate funding streams to be talking with each other, collaborating, figuring out what are the ways to maximize the benefit of these resources that are flowing to us so that we get better results. And it is a problem at the federal level, but I think we need to force a paradigm shift that really is asking the question, how do we have confidence that communities and decision makers at the state and local level and their nonprofit partners are making the best possible choices based on data and evidence and what they are learning from their own test and learn strategies to get maximum outcomes.
Is there a way that grant-making agencies can coordinate their funding, and who can initiate such coordination?
So interestingly, on that question of how grantees could be getting more coordinated assistance and be able to have conversations with multiple agencies and programs at the same time, I've recently been part of a process to consider, develop, design some federal legislation that is now introduced in the House called the Social Determinants Accelerator Act, or HR 4004. But what it does is it recognizes that we are now in a structure where a state or local government has to shop their idea to multiple places, and if they get one answer that says, sorry, that doesn't work for us, their innovations are stopped in their tracks. And instead, what this bill would do, and what a lot of folks in Congress seem to want it to do, is to say the federal government has a responsibility to help state and local governments spend their dollars more effectively. And to do that, that requires creating an intergovernmental council, an interagency council, and teams from multiple agencies who can support the work of state and local governments as they're trying to push the envelope on how to do business differently. It's a different conversation. You know, it's structuring the conversations differently and putting state and local governments in the driver's seat and expecting the feds to change their policies to adapt to that. You can't do it everywhere. This piece of legislation does it through a grant program where there would be up to 25 states and localities that would be given this sort of special privilege, but I think it would set out a learning process that would potentially, hopefully, demonstrate the benefits of changing the conversation.
Should there be a portion of grant resources set aside for performance management?
So I would say yes. I think we have an unfortunate interpretation that has been ingrained over the years that program dollars are for services and data analytics and evaluation is somewhere over here as an independent activity that requires its own funding stream unless explicitly required by the federal government. I think we are destined for failure if we don't figure out how to build in the expectation that when program dollars go out the door, it should be a required activity to be using data, understand what's going well, what's not going well, and what could be improved. I personally think that could be done through some government-wide guidance from OMB to agencies saying, unless it's specifically prohibited in the statute, it should be an allowable cost to use data for performance management, evaluation, analytics for continuous improvement.
This podcast series is produced by REI Systems. To see and hear more podcasts in this series, or for more information, please visit reisystems.com/grants. If you'd like to contribute to this conversation, send a note to grants@reisystems.com.